Hey guys, today I am going to do a page in my Life Crafted album and I'm going to use the new stamp set from Kellie Stamps, Game Night. Now I'm going to use the clear stamp version and the digital stamp version. I have got a few photos of some of our family Zoom game nights over lockdown. I've also grabbed this paper from the Slice of Life collection and I want to do some foiling. So I've got my gold star foil and some clear texture paste, and I am going to create a stencil using the digital stamp set. So I'm going to head over to the computer and do that with you now. So to make my stencil, the first thing I'm going to do is just drag out a rectangle so that I know what size I need to make my stencil to fit on my Life Crafted page. So I'm going to make that 5 by 8 1/4. Oops, didn't hit 5. So this is the size of my Life Crafted page, but I don't want to take into consideration about a 1/2 inch on that side because that's where the holes are going to be. So I don't want my stencil to go over the holes. So I think in the end I'm going to make it about 4.5 wide. And that way when I place my stencil I can make sure it's in the right place, but it means that I'm not going to make it too large. So to create my stencil, I am going to drag in the family game night PNG file. Now cheat here, I have the Silhouette Studio 4.4 beta version. So this means that when I drag in a PNG file, it automatically has the cut lines around it. But let me adjust this 1 second and then I'll come back and show you how to do that if you don't have 4.4. So let's go ahead and pretend that I don't have 4.4 and I have bought in my PNG file. I just need to trace this thing. So I'm going to select a trace area, drag it over the digital stamp, and if I zoom in here you can see it's picked up all of that, even the little lines. But what I want to do is when I do my stencil, I'm not going to be able to cut inside here. I'm not going to be able to, it's basically just going to cut solids. So to save myself a little bit of time, I'm just going to trace outer edge. And then when I pull the tracing off here, I can delete the original PNG file. And this is what I'm left with. So this is what's going to cut. That's going to be my stencil. I just need to drag it onto my rectangle here and drag that up so it is the right height. Now I'm going to make it as close to the size as I can. So I'm going to say maybe it's going to be about 4.25. And I think that looks good. It's going to have holes on the side. I'll be able to adjust it once I see it on my actual page. The other thing I am going to do though is I am going to, rather than cut my stencil into a whole sheet that I'm going to need to adjust, I am going to cut it onto a little frame so that it gives me enough room to use the texture paste, but I can still see roughly where it is on my page. So this is the stencil that I'm going to cut. I don't anticipate ever having to use this more than once, so I'm not going to cut it from stencil material or anything like that. I'm just going to cut it from a little bit of scrap cardboard, and then I will see you back at the desk. So while my stencil was cutting, I went ahead and trimmed down my pattern paper to be my 2 Life Crafted pages. So that's 2 5 by 8.25 pages, and I've also hole punched them so that they'll fit into my album. I did trim that out of the middle of the paper so that I get all of the colors and the fun arrows. So here you can see my stencil. I've pulled that off the mat. It is still a tiny bit sticky from my mat, which is actually kind of a good thing because it helps the stencil stick down while I'm using the paste. And you can see here what I mean about having that cut down to a slightly smaller size means that I can more easily line it up onto my paper. I'm trying really hard to make sure that I'm going to be able to, one, fit my photo at the top, but also so that it's straight, so I can look at the bottom here and just make sure that that's lined up straight with my paper. It's not covering up any of those holes, so it's going to work totally fine to put the texture paste. So I'm going to use a little bit of the texture paste, and I'm just using some of that scrap cardboard as my palette. I'm using a palette knife, and I'm going to just really kind of gently scrape that over top of my stencil. I don't see any way to really cleanly put this texture paste back into the tube, so I am trying to be relatively stingy with how much I pull out at one time. But I also want to kind of make the amount of texture paste that I use reasonably thick. I want it to be kind of the same height as the cardboard, and reasonably smooth too. I mean, obviously it's not going to be perfect, but that's what I'm aiming for. Once I get that kind of smoothed out the way I like it, I can really carefully peel that stencil off and then go ahead and let that texture paste dry. I'm going to be totally honest with you, I have zero patience for this sort of thing, so I did go and heat that up with a hairdryer, you know, not a high heat, but just to try and dry that off as quickly as possible. I didn't want to warp the paper, so that's why I was using sort of a cooler setting just to dry it off quicker, but you could otherwise just leave that until it goes clear. You can tell that it's dry. Now I've trimmed down a piece of foil, so it's just slightly larger. I've gone quite excessively large there. I love this star pattern though. This is the first time I've used it, and it's so pretty. I don't have an actual mink machine, I just have a totally cheap laminator, and it still works perfectly well. I will, however, say that I do use those mink like guiding sheets. I just find that helps the foil go on nice and smoothly. And so when you peel that off, it just has the most amazing texture. It's kind of like using thickers, like they are. It really is much thicker and definitely a lot smoother than, say, printing the digital stamp, which would be another option. But this one, I just love how that came out. So that is fun. It's something I'm definitely going to be doing again. So I'm going to use the screenshot of our game up the top, but I do have a couple of other photos. Those were sort of after our game night. It was a bit of a disaster, this game night, and it was hilarious. I literally didn't stop laughing for 3 days. So I have a couple of photos of that. I just needed some way to kind of add some journaling and attach my photos onto the side without kind of overtaking that really foiled title. I want that to definitely be the highlight. So I'm going to use this piece of vellum. This is from Lawn Fawn, and it's iridescent. It's really hard to see on camera, but in real life it's got this really pretty green reflect to it. So I've trimmed out a piece that's just slightly wider than my photos, and it is taller than my page, which is perfect because one of the issues with vellum is how to attach it. So I folded over the excess at the top, and I've just added a tiny little piece of red line tape. I can line that up, pull off the tape, and then attach that to the back of my page, and it means that's my vellum attached, all totally concealed. So I'm going to adhere my photos onto my vellum, and where those photos sit, I can always add a little bit more tape to attach that as well. Or if you wanted to leave it as a flap, if you had more journaling than that, you could journal on the whole length of that vellum and then add your photos in behind, and that might look really cute too. You'd be able to lift the journaling up and see the photos underneath. It's one of the beauties of the Life Crafted album. You can have all sorts of interactive elements like that. I, however, am going to stick my photos down on top, so I'm adding a little bit of craft foam just to give that a tiny bit of dimension off the paper and stop this right-hand side from being quite so flat. So I've added some craft foam, and I'm just using some double-sided adhesive there to adhere those photos down onto the vellum. I end up dropping that. It's lucky the tape runner isn't totally permanent straight away. And I decided that I would add some foam to the photo on the left-hand side of the page as well, just to kind of balance that all out, but also help it stand out from the background paper. I actually broke my tape runner, so I ended up resorting to double-sided tape, and it works just as fine. So I added that directly above my title so that there's kind of an even border around all sides of that. And then I want to use the actual physical stamp set to create a kind of embellishment for the page. I don't want to go sort of too heavy-handed with embellishing the page. It always feels busy enough to me when I've got a pen and paper background rather than say white or something a bit more subtle. And so as far as the rest of the page goes, I am going to keep it relatively simple. So I grabbed some Catherine Pooler ink, some really pretty pink ink to match my paper, and I've stamped out that circle family time. I did stamp it a couple of times because I never know how well this die cutting thing's going to go. So I've got a little circle die, and I'm just going to tape that down on the outside of the die just to make sure it doesn't move. It actually fits the stamp perfectly, so I was super pleased with that. I'm going to use my little diamond press. I don't know if these little die cutting machines are still available anywhere. I got mine from Spotlight. It's so handy just having it sat on my desk there. I don't have to pull out my big Cuttlebug. It did cut it a little bit rough though. I think I need to get a new plate for it if I can. So that's my little embellishment, and I'm just going to add it on here. I sort of toy with adding it other places, but I think it suits being on the right hand side just to add a little bit more interest to that right hand side. I really do want to leave the gold foil part alone as much as I can. So I'm going to have to add craft foam to this because it's going to sit on top of my photo, which has the craft foam underneath it. So I've added the craft foam just on the half of the circle that's not going to sit on top of the photo, and it's at this point that I realized I haven't adhered these photos down yet, so I'm going to add just a tiny bit of tape behind each one, not going too crazy. It's just going to be enough just to stick that down, and then I can add my kind of embellishment circle here, trying to get that writing as straight as possible. I can't resist adding a tiny bit more though, and I've got still oodles of these life crafted enamel dots left over, so I am going to go a little bit crazy and sprinkle them all around. They're kind of the perfect colors for this paper, so I'm sort of doing tone on tone. I am adding a couple of different colors here and there, but trying to keep it relatively tone on tone just to add a little bit more. It's not even embellishment, it's kind of texture to the page, and I really do enjoy how it turns out. I do have to faff around with them a little bit though, because I start off by trying to add sort of 3 points of interest, and I get 2 on the right hand side, and I really struggle with where I can add a third one on the left hand page. So these little enamel dots are very small on that left hand side, and so I decide to then break my own rule of 3 and start adding a few more here and there. So once I get that out of my head, I just go ahead and start sprinkling them really, but I am trying relatively hard to keep them as tone on tone as I can. And as soon as I've finished adding those, that is my layout all done. Now don't forget that you can use the code Diane10 to get 10% off any purchase of $15 or more at the Kellie Stamps store. I will leave all the links for you down below in the description box. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you want to keep watching, there are a couple more videos on screen. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye guys.